Chapter 1. The Streets of Anvalan. The alley was narrow, the walls on either side rising high and close enough to block out most of the daylight. Fuertun moved cautiously through the shadows, his eyes darting here and there for any sign of trouble. Despite his youth, there was a precision to his movements, the kind that came from living on the streets for longer than any child should. His pale skin, almost ghostly in the dim light, stretched taut over his gaunt features. His cheeks were hollow, and his sharp jawline stood out, further defined by his thinness, a testament to the hunger that was his constant companion. Fuertun's hair, a messy tangle of brown with a hint of auburn that glinted faintly in the rare beams of sunlight, hung down almost to his eyes. It was dirty, matted from days without a proper wash, yet despite his shabby appearance, there was something meticulous about him. His fingernails, oddly clean for a boy living on the streets, were always kept neat. It was a small, particular habit he had clung to, perhaps a reminder that even in the midst of this hardship there was something he could control, something he could keep in order. He wore ragged clothes that barely fit him, a shirt too large for his frame, and pants cinched at the waist with a piece of frayed rope. His boots, scuffed and worn, were far too big, likely handed down from someone much older. His slight figure nearly disappeared into the shadows as he navigated the labyrinth of the alleyways he had come to know so well. His eyes, a deep, haunted brown, spoke of a life far too harsh for someone so young. There was a sharpness to them, a wariness born from experience, and an unyielding determination that kept him moving forward despite the odds stacked against him. He might have been small, malnourished, and easily overlooked by those who passed him by, but inside there was a small flame in his heart, like that of a candle, a quiet, yet soft light he fought to keep safe. As Fuertun crept through the alley, the familiar pang of hunger gnawed at his belly. It was a sensation he had grown used to, a constant ache that had become a part of him. He pushed it aside, focusing instead on the more immediate challenges that each day brought. His mind sharp, alert to the threats hidden in the shadows, the echo of footsteps that might signal trouble. He needed to stay one step ahead of the dangers that lurked around every corner. Survival came first. Everything else, including his next meal, would have to follow. He wasn't alone. A group of other street kids moved with him, their eyes gleaming with a mix of hunger and mischief. They weren't his friends. On the streets, friendship was a luxury few could afford. But they were the closest thing he had to a pack. They moved together out of necessity, scavenging for food and stealing what they had to, fighting when it came to that. Fuertun kept his distance from the others. There was a light within him, a gentle glow that guided his sense of right and wrong. While the other street children could be cruel, exploiting the weak without a second thought, Fuertun didn't share that instinct. He fought only when necessary, defending himself and others, but never preyed on those more vulnerable than him. It was a line he wouldn't cross, no matter how empty his stomach was. "Look," one of the boys whispered, pointing ahead. "It's a girl." Fuertun followed the boy's gaze and saw her. She was young, maybe his age, but dressed in fine clothes that marked her as someone from the upper city. She looked out of place, lost, scared, her eyes wide as she took in the grimy surroundings. "That's the princess," another boy hissed, his voice filled with excitement. "She must have gotten separated from her guards. We could take her purse, maybe even ransom her." Fuertun felt a surge of unease. The girl was clearly lost, vulnerable. His stomach twisted with hunger, but something stronger than hunger pulled at him, a sense of guilt and responsibility. "No," Fuertun said firmly, stepping forward to block the other boys. "Leave her alone." The other boys stared at him with surprise, then anger. "What are you talking about?" one of them sneered. "You're as hungry as the rest of us. Don't tell you're going to turn down a full purse just because she's a girl." Fuertun squared his shoulders and set his jaw. "She's lost. We shouldn't hurt her." The boys exchanged looks, their eyes narrowing. "You think you're better than us, Fuertun? Just because you're too scared to get your hands dirty?" Fuertun didn't flinch. "It's not about being scared. It's about what's right." The princess was cornered at the far end of the alley, her back pressed against the cold stone wall. Fuertun stood between her and the approaching boys, with his arms spread out wide in a protective stance. His gaze flicked from one face to another, trying to anticipate their next move. The leader of the group, a lanky boy with a cruel smile, swaggered forward, his chipped knife glinting in the faint light. He toyed the blade, spinning it casually between his fingers, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You think you can stop us, Fuertun?" The lanky boy sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're just a street rat like us. You act like you're better. Well, let's see how noble you are after a lesson." The boys closed in, forming a circle around Fuertun and the princess. He tried to keep himself between them and the girl, but there were too many. With a sudden lunge, the lanky leader lashed out with his knife, catching Fuertun's cheek. The blade left a thin, stinging line of red, just enough to draw blood. Fuertun winced, but didn't back down. "Get him!" the leader shouted, his voice echoing in the narrow alley. Two boys rushed at Fuertun, shoving him hard. He stumbled, but kept his ground, trying to fend them off. He managed to land a punch on one, but the other tackled him from the side, sending him crashing to the cobblestones. As Fuertun struggled to get up, the lanky boy kicked him in the ribs, knocking the wind out of him. Fuertun gasped, pain flaring on his side. "Stop it!" the princess cried out, tears streaming down her cheeks. She tried to run to Fuertun, but another boy blocked her path, shoving her back against the wall. Fuertun's vision blurred as the boys rained down blows on him. He fought back as best he could, but he was outnumbered. A fist caught him in the jaw, snapping his head to the side. He tasted blood. Another kick sent him sprawling. The lanky leader leaned down, grabbing Fuertun by the collar and lifting him slightly off the ground. "You're not so tough, are you?" he hissed, before letting Fuertun drop back down, his head hitting the stone with a dull thud. Satisfied, the leader turned his attention to the princess. The boys moved toward her, and Fuertun, dazed and hurting, could only watch as they ripped the silk purse from her trembling hands. The leader flipped the purse open, coins spilling onto his palm. He grinned wide at the sight of the glinting silver. "We're done here," he said, pocketing the money. The boys followed him as he swaggered away, leaving Fuertun bruised and bleeding on the ground, his face marked by the thin cut from the knife. The princess sank to her knees beside him, her sobs the only sound in the quiet alley. Fuertun lay on the ground, bruised and bleeding, but he didn't let himself stay there for long. He struggled to his feet, ignoring the pain, and helped the girl to her feet. She was still crying, her face pale with fear and shock. "I'm sorry," Fuertun said softly, his voice rough from the beating. "I couldn't stop them." The princess looked up at him, her eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You tried to help me. You're a good person." Fuertun didn't know how to respond. Her words warmed him, even as his body ached with pain. He offered her a small, hesitant smile. But before he could say anything more, a shadow fell over him. Kether appeared at the entrance of the alley, his eyes dark with anger. He was a few years older than Fuertun, already strong and well-fed, the son of a wealthy merchant. They had crossed paths before, their encounters always ending with Kether looking for a reason to exert his superiority. To Kether, Fuertun was just a nuisance to be put in his place. "What's going on here?" Kether demanded, his voice sharp. He took in the scene, the princess's tears, the blood on Fuertun's face, and his expression darkened. Without waiting for an explanation, Kether grabbed Fuertun by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "You street rat," he spat, his voice full of disdain. "What did you do to her?" Fuertun tried to speak, to explain, but Kether didn't give him a chance. His fist came down hard, again and again, the blows relentless. Fuertun could hear the princess crying out, begging Kether to stop, but the older boy didn't listen. When Kether finally stepped back, his chest heaving with exertion, Fuertun slumped to the ground, barely conscious. The princess knelt beside him, her small hands shaking as she reached out to touch his bruised face. "He didn't hurt me," she sobbed. He tried to help. Please, you have to believe me. Kether looked at her, then back at Fuertun, his expression hardening. Stay away from street rats like him, he said coldly. They're nothing but trouble. He took the princess by the hand and led her away, leaving Fuertun alone in the alley, beaten and broken.